Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Inept General, and today we are bringing you a unit stat comparison for the new unit we're going to be getting in the upcoming DLC, the Warden and the Paunch. If you guys would like a bit more detail on exactly what's in the DLC and what free DLC we can expect, please do check the top right hand corner now, or you'll find a link to my full breakdown of the DLC in the description below. But for now, we're just going to take a look one by one at the units and see what their stats look like and how we might be able to use them on the battlefield in Total War Warhammer. As with all of my unit stat comparison videos, which I've done in the past, guys, there's a couple of caveats we should probably get out of the way early. I think I have my game set to ultra or high unit size, so if you see some disparity in there, that's why, in terms of the number of units and how it might differ from your own game. The stats are, of course, from the multiplayer or custom battle menus, and so they might not match your campaign stats exactly, but they should give you a good idea. And of course, this is on a preview build of the game, guys. These statistics aren't final, but it should give us a good idea of at least the intent of the designers, and hopefully not that much will change from now until release. So just keep those things in mind as we go through these unit stats and we look at the units that will be on offer. So let's start off with the High Elves. And the legendary lord for the High Elves is, of course, Eltharion the Grim. Now we can take a look at some of his standing stats here. This is without his mount and with all his items, but we really want to get an idea of him at full power, don't we? So let's have a look at his stats with his trusted mount, Stormfiend. And this is what he looks like with that. Much more expensive at 3,607 with all his magic as well. He, of course, has an item, at least on the tabletop lore he did, that allowed him to use magical powers, although not being a magician himself. So in Total War Warhammer, he's been given the lore of high magic, which is a pretty handy lore. As we can see, he looks great on his griffin there, trusted friend and companion. Now, when we look at his stats on the griffin, we also get an idea of some of his unique abilities. Now, we're just going to go through these. The first one, I think, is Mistwalker Barrage, which is basically a bombardment effect that occurs around him whenever he's in melee. Every sort of 30 seconds or so, he'll just be fighting and some arrows will rain down seemingly out of nowhere upon the enemy. He also has Grim Discipline, giving him a boost to melee defense and melee attack. His items include the Fang Sword, which give him magical damage and augment him with plus 25 armor piercing and plus 44 physical resistance when he triggers that one. And he also has the Helm of Yvresse, which makes basically units immune to death for a while and makes it so they don't run away. So really encouraging units who are maybe on their last legs to fight that little bit longer, just to keep going and do a bit more damage to the enemy. In terms of comparing Eltharion to other legendary lords, I wanted to take a look at another legendary lord with a similar type of mount, and that is King Luon Leoncoeur of Bretonnia and his mount Birquis. Although that is a hippogriff and not technically a griffin, they are relatively similar mounts. Now, how do these two stack up against each other? Well, Eltharion is much more expensive at nearly 1,000 more than King Luon, and he also has less hit points. In terms of their actual stats, they sort of both have aspects where they cause terror, their armor piercing. Eltharion has the armored bonus as well, which just means he has a lot of armor, but if you look at their stats, the armor between the two isn't that different, with Luon at 90 and Eltharion at 100. In terms of leadership, Eltharion takes that one with 85 against 80. Speed, Birquis is a bit quicker than Stormfiend by about 10 there. Melee attack, very similar, 54 for Eltharion, 56 for King Luon. Melee defense, 44, 45, again, very similar. And weapon strength, in fact, exactly the same for the both of them as well. And in terms of the charge bonus, not too far off. Eltharion takes it, and Luon sits at 75 to Eltharion's 80. Now, of course, in terms of their individual skills, they both have different benefits, but we can't forget Eltharion also has a whole lore of magic he's able to use, which might account for the pricing. but in terms of their stats, they're not too far away from each other there. Moving on from the first legendary lord for the High Elves, in terms of free DLC, somebody everybody will be getting is Imric of Caledor, the Dragon Prince himself. We're going to have a look mostly what he looks like on his dragon. In terms of his abilities, there's a couple of abilities he has going on. One is called Dragonhorn, which is an augmentation for 16 seconds and affect allies anywhere on the map. That is plus 24 melee attack and enables them to cause fear. That says can cause fear. I assume that's just in case they're up against any units that are immune to psychology or anything like that. It might not have an effect. He also has the Lord of Dragon ability, which is a hex, which enemies within 150 meters, minus 24 melee defense, minus 40 attack for 30 seconds. That is a pretty good hex for him to be able to have. And his item is his Star Lance, does fire damage, and for a 29-second effect, it can do plus 25% armor piercing, plus 20% charge speed, and 50% charge bonus. So really allowing you to go in there and do some damage. Also renders your enemies flammable for 20 seconds, giving them extra weakness to fire, allowing that fire damage to do even more when you go in against an enemy. Now, in terms of comparing Elfarion to anyone, there aren't a lot of lords, or I don't think there are any other legendary lords who ride a dragon. So when we're looking at this, the only one I could really think to compare him to is actually the High Elf Lord of just the princes when they're mounted on Star Dragons. Now, as we can see here, they're not too far off price-wise, with Imric on his dragon and all items sitting at 3,369, and the prince with all his items and the dragon, as far as multiplayer or custom games go, is sitting at 3,190. Both of them Star Dragon's Breath, both of them armor piercing, both of them cause terror. And let's take a look at their health. Pretty comparable, 8,578 versus 8,444. Armor, the same. Leadership, Imric takes it by 5 at 85 to 80. Speed, the same. Melee attack goes to Imric, beating out the prince by 6. Melee defense by 2. Imric as well. And weapon strength, the same. Charge bonus is 50 going to Imric, beating the prince by 5. So kind of if you look at this from just pure stats, not looking at his abilities, and there are some abilities that Imric has that makes him very good, particularly in the campaign, but in terms of his abilities in the battlefield, it looks like Imric of Caledor is really kind of just like a slightly souped up prince on a Star Dragon. So not a huge amount of difference there. We could maybe have been hoping for him to be a bit stronger, but then again, if you make him too strong, the princes on dragons are already pretty hard to deal with. So Imric, if you made him too strong, I could see how he could unbalance the game. But all in all, pretty good to see Imric there. He also looks fantastic when he's on his other mount, which is his trusted steed, all in white. Looks absolutely radiant. Can't wait for you guys to get your hands on Imric. Moving on from Imric, we do have a new lord, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the archmages. They have all the laws of magic. Their pricing varies, but not much, from about 1523 at the height with the Archmage of Heavens to I think it's 1499 with one of the other archmages, and I think that pricing is just dependent on how powerful their lore of magic is. Basically just wizards. Like slightly souped up wizards with different mount options. They can be mounted on a steed, a chariot, an eagle, or a dragon. So the archmages can be on dragons. And now the fire mages, just the standard mages, not the archmages, will also be able to be mounted on dragons, because they're a particular type of high elf mage, which was the fire mages, which tended to ride around on dragons. Moving on to the units. The first unit we're going to take a look at are the Rangers. Now, the Rangers are a dual-wielding infantry, not really a tabletop unit historically, but they were in a game called Warhammer Quest. These guys are anti-infantry, go in there, not that solid in defense, but pretty good, and real damage dealers. So the ones who sort of made the most likely comparison in the game we have so far are the War Dancers of the Wood Elves. Now, the War Dancers have Forest Stalker, which isn't that dissimilar to Forest Strider, but they do have a couple of extra bonuses. In terms of health, it looks like the Rangers take it, and that might be due to their unit size, which is slightly bigger than the War Dancers. They have double the armor of the War Dancers at 30 compared to the War Dancers 15. Same leadership. They are a little bit slower than the War Dancers, presumably because of all the extra armor. The War Dancer speed is 46 compared to the Rangers 40. Melee attack only 28 compared to the War Dancers 40. Melee defense 24 compared to the War Dancers 38. Weapon strength 28. The War Dancers are at 36. And charge bonus, the War Dancers take that as well at 24 to 18. Now, the Rangers are 200 gold cheaper than the War Dancers, so it's understandable that the War Dancers might be a bit more powerful, but this is a bit of a niche in the High Elf unit. Really helps them deal with maybe hordes of more annoying enemies early on. So an interesting new unit there of the Rangers. They are kind of fun and can be pretty rapid when just trying to chase down and kill enemies as well. Moving on from the Rangers, we have the Silverin Guard. Now, when they were first announced, they were described as kind of a souped-up spearman unit. So let's take a look at the Silverin Guard against some basic spearmen then, shall we? And the two spearman units we're going to look at them against are the Spearmen of the High Elves and the Eternal Guard of the Wood Elves. All the elves, let's compare them against each other. Now, the Silverin Guard have enchanted armor, armored and shielded, anti-large, and charged defense against all. The others have shielded, anti-large, and charged defense against large foes. Not against all, just larger foes. And the Eternal Guard have Forest Stalker as well. So let's take a look. The Silverin Guard have much higher armor due to their enchanted armor there. The idea of the Silverin Guard's enchanted armor actually has a foundation lore-wise. It's that they're meant to be wearing armor from the founding of Yvresse when war with Chaos was going on. And so it's meant to be particularly effective against Chaos demons and the like. But it looks like in the game it's just represented as a higher armor value. So that's why they have the higher armor value. Also the shield, of course, protecting them against missiles. Leadership, they're directly in between the Spearmen and the Eternal Guard at 75. And in terms of speed, they're all elves, they're all the same speed, roughly the same armament if you consider the Silverin armor is enchanted. Melee attack, 28, 8 higher than the normal Spearmen and 2 higher than the Eternal Guard. Melee defense is 42. That's actually lower than the Eternal Guard and higher than your normal Spearmen. Now this is where they really take it away, is weapon strength 32 compared to only 25 for the Spearmen and only 24 for the Eternal Guard. So overall, much better than both of those Spearmen units. Now, they don't really rack up against the Phoenix Guard, but they're kind of a different unit. As far as early tier Spearmen go, these guys really are the pick of the bunch. Even to mid-tier, they're probably pretty solid as well. And if you want something on your front lines that can resist missile fire, perhaps you'd actually prefer them over something like the Phoenix Guard. So that's the Silverin Guard. Moving on from them, another new unit are the War Lions of Crace. Now, these guys are fantastic. I'm very happy to see them in the game. And there are two variations of these guys. There's the Chariot and there's these guys here who are the kind of pack of lions, or pride of lions, if you prefer. These guys do armor piercing, anti-infantry, and have lion pelt, which I think gives them 15 or to 20% missile resistance. I think it's 20. I can't remember exactly. But they also cause fear. When we wanted to go against some of these, we have to do something that's sort of also armor-piercing and anti-infantry or some other units that are animals running around attacking folks. So I decided to put them up against the Razorgore Herd and the Norscan Ice Wolves. So let's have a look at how they compare. In terms of unit size, they are the smallest with only 24. There's 32 in the Razorgore Herd and 48 in the Ice Wolves. Armor is, not the highest, but much higher than the Wolves, a little bit lower than the Razorgore Herd at 35. Leadership, the same as the Razorgore Herd at 55 and a little bit higher than the Wolves at 45. Speed 82, so they're much faster than the Razorgore Herd, and a fair bit slower than the Norscan Ice Wolves. Melee attack 30, higher than both the Razorgore Herd and the Wolves. Melee defense 28, again, higher significantly than the Razorgore Herd at 16 and the Wolves at 19. And weapon strength 50, with anti-infantry and armor piercing. Again, pretty much the same as the Razorgore beating them out narrowly with 52 and much higher than the Norsec Ice Wolves at 42. Charge, again, at 40, around the same as the Wolves, a little bit higher and not quite as damaging as the Razorgore Herd at 46. When you look at the pricing here, you'd think the War Lions might take it a bit better. Now, their melee attack and melee defense is better. They have a bit of health somewhere in between the two, actually very close to the Razorgore Herd at 6,096, a lot less than the Norscan Ice Wolves, probably due to the numbers there. So I think they might be priced a little bit expensive, if you ask me, compared to some of these other units and what they can do. But those are the War Lions. Perhaps that might be changed later on. But they are a good unit, and, you know, a quick unit that can chase down some missiles or something in the high alpha ranks is very welcome addition. Looking at the lines of Krace again in their chariot form, these guys have the white lines, their namesake unit, astride the chariots with their axes. These guys are armored, armor piercing, anti-infantry, and have that lion pelt resistance. So we're really looking at some of the more elite chariots in the game so far. And so what we're going to look at in comparing these units to anything else are the Razorgore Chariot and the Gorebeast Chariot. Now, both of these are armored chariots. They do armor piercing and they're anti-infantry. They both have the same amount of units in them. And in terms of health, we have the Lion Chariot at 6,592, the Razorgore at 6,144, and the Gorebeast Chariot at 6,560. So they're all roughly within the ballpark of one another, but the Razorgore may be losing out a bit there. In terms of their armor, the Lion Chariot is actually the least armored of them all, with 80 compared to the 100 for the Razorgores and 130 for the Gorebeast Chariot. Leadership, the highest at 75. Speed, the highest at 82. The melee attack is at 34 compared to the 24 of the Razorgore and the 30 of the Gorebeast. So the highest melee attack there. Melee defense, 28, same as the Razorgore Chariot, and a little bit lower than the Gorebeast, so the Gorebeast perhaps a bit more resilient. Weapon strength, 56, of course with the armor piercing and anti-infantry, and that is higher than both the Razorgore Chariot and the Gorebeast Chariot. And charge bonus, 70, a little bit lower than the Razorgore, and fairly bit lower than the Gorebeast at 80. They all cause fear, but the Lion Chariot there, the most expensive of the bunch at 1,300. It has the better stats. It's the quickest by a fair bit. And that missile resistance could come in very handy, particularly when chasing down missile units. You know what? I'd like to see the Gorebeast take it in a one-on-one fight. At least according to the lore in my head, I think a Gorebeast might be able to beat up a lion. But these lions are pretty cool, and that's a very powerful chariot unit, and that's something I'm not looking forward to the AI picking up at any point during any of my other campaigns and going against them with that. An AI with a chariot that powerful could do a lot of damage. So moving on to the last regular unit of the High Elves, and that is the Arcane Phoenix. This beautiful creature here flapping about. It looks fantastic. I love the multicolored look. It is maybe just a bit of a reskin, but it's a lovely one at that, very artistically done. And when comparing the Phoenix to anything, nothing, like the way they attack and the way you can use them, the only thing I could think to do was just to compare them to the other two Phoenixes. So we have the Arcane Phoenix compared to the Flamespire and the Frostheart Phoenix here. Now, the Arcane Phoenix is the most expensive of the bunch at 1,850, and it also has the most health at 7,158. In terms of the armor, it's about between the two of the Frostheart and the Flamespire at 50 compared to the Flamespire's 30 and the Frostheart's 80. Leadership is the highest at 90. Speed is the same as the Flamespire at 120. Melee attack is 46, magic and fire unlike the Frostheart, which only does magic, at 35, and the Flamespire, which does both of those things, but at 42. So melee attack is the highest of the group. Melee defense, again, higher than the Flamespire, but not quite as high as the Frostheart, at 40, with the Frostheart sitting at 48. In terms of weapon strength, it does do the most amount of damage. 440 with armor piercing against the 330 armor piercing of the Flamespire and the 400 armor piercing of the Frostheart Phoenix. Charge bonus is 58, highest of the bunch. The Flamespire is 54, and the Frostheart is 40. And the key thing with the Arcane Phoenixes is the way they attack. Instead of the bombs that the Flamespire drops, or just going in and attacking like the Frostheart Phoenix does with its slowing aura, this thing just has a stable vortex. It can do a lot of damage if you drop it, particularly on a densely packed group of enemies who are perhaps not moving around that much in a stagnant position. Can be a pretty devastating attack. But that is the Arcane Phoenix and how it stands against the other Phoenixes we've already had in the game. And moving on from the regular units that will be available both on the campaign and the multiplayer, we're now just going to look at the units available in the campaign. So stuff like unit cost isn't as relevant, because it'll only come into it in a custom match as opposed to a regular multiplayer game. So we'll take that with a grain of salt in terms of costings, but it does give us a good guideline in terms of what to compare these units against. So the first of the campaign units for the High Elves is the Athel Tamara Faithbearers. Now, these are the guys who let down Eltharion's dad and ran away, but have sworn their lives to protect Eltharion. And they are pretty expensive in terms of their custom battle pricing at 1,000. But what they basically are swordsmen with frenzy. So when comparing them, I wanted to put them up against another unit of swordsmen with frenzy. And, you know, as they are so expensive, at least in the custom battle, we get an idea to put them against some of the more elite infantry. And I picked up some Chaos Warriors to compare them against as far as that goes. So in terms of their unit size, they're at 120, which is the same as the Battle Pilgrim, so pretty big units they have. Their health sits at 8,760, not too far off the Battle Pilgrims or the Chaos Warriors, kind of in between the two there, with the Chaos Warriors sitting at 9,000, but with far less units in their regiment. Armor, 80, with Silver Shield missile resistance. The Battle Pilgrims, their shields are just planks of wood, so obviously they aren't as good, and the Chaos guys have 100 armor with that same shielded missile resistance there. Leadership, 75, same as the Chaos Warriors, a little bit less than the Battle Pilgrims. Speed, a little bit quicker than the Battle Pilgrims, who themselves are quicker than the Chaos Warriors, with the Elves' speed at 33. Melee attack, 34, on par with the other two units, with the melee attack of the Battle Pilgrims, 32, and the Chaos Warriors, 36. Melee defense, 30. Beaten by the Battle Pilgrims by 1, and by the Chaos Warriors by a fair bit at 44. Weapon strength, 32, and that is the same as the Battle Pilgrims. And in terms of the Chaos Warriors, they have them both be at 36. And then charge bonus, 15, the lowest of the bunch, with the Battle Pilgrims at 18 and the Chaos Warriors at 20. Now, the Frenzy ability, the missile resistance, and the martial prowess, as well as the encourage aspect of these guys, is probably what makes them so expensive, because as far as their stats, they really do stack up not terribly against the Battle Pilgrims, much higher armor really, or against the Chaos Warriors, who are significantly cheaper than the Athel Tamara Faithbearers, but it's just those extra things that they do that probably tip them in terms of their costing there. Next up, after the Faithbearers, we have the Skyhawks. Now, these guys are a hybrid unit with the Stalk ability. They are anti-infantry as far as their hand-to-hand combat goes, and they do have Stalk. The Skyhawks also have a thing where they are weak against armor. So it was kind of tricky figuring out who to compare these guys against, but I've put up the Shadow Warriors of the High Elves and the Gutter Runners of the Skaven to kind of have a look and see how you might be able to play with the Skyhawks. Looking at their stats, they are the most armored of both of these units, so probably last a bit longer in a fight. They have the most leadership at 75 compared to the 72 of the Shadow Warriors and the 54 of the Gutter Runners. Their speed is 40, so they're pretty rapid, same speed as the Shadow Warriors, slower than the Skaven. And their melee attack is 42. That's a little bit higher than the Shadow Warriors and much higher than the Skaven Gutter Runners. Now, their melee defense is 22. That is exactly the same as the Shadow Warriors and a little bit higher than the Gutter Runners. The weapon strength is 43. That is significantly higher than the Shadow Warriors and the Gutter Runners. And their charge bonus is 24, again higher than the other two there. In terms of their ammunition, they're a bit more limited at 13, very close to the same amount of ammunition you might expect from the Gutter Runners, who have ammunition of 12. The Shadow Warriors have a lot more at 20. Their range is fairly limited as well, only at 100. For comparison, the Shadow Warriors have a range of 180. The Gutter Runners have a smaller range, although it's not too far off at 70. So you get an idea of it. They're very much mid to near range as far as their projectiles go, and their projectiles aren't that strong. Their projectiles are anti-infantry, but they're only at 17 compared to the 22 missile strength of the Shadow Warriors and the 22 missile strength of the Gutter Runners. Really, the shooting for the Skyhawks is almost like a bonus. You kind of want to get, don't be scared of throwing them in the fight. They'll do okay. But, you know, maybe they can sort of replace the Ranger unit later on with the additional shooting, and they can go in and have a fight for you there. So an interesting unit, one that you really have to sort of think about what armies you want to put them into and how to best make use of them. After the Skyhawks, we have the Sentinels of Astrael. These guys are a very interesting unit. Shielded with spears and they shoot arrows, not unlike the Lefern Sea Guard, but what really distinguishes them is their shield breaker ability. They break the armor of units or sunder the armor of units they hit with their arrows, softening them up for either other missile units or for other units to run into. Now, the one downside of these guys is they have a low rate of fire, so they're not going to get too many volleys off. So I figured they do have the exact same cost as the Lefern Sea Guard with shields. So let's just put them up against each other and see how they compare in terms of their statistics. The Sentinels have less men in their unit, and so have a lower health as well, at 5,440 compared to the 6,120 of the Lefern Sea Guard. But their armor is much higher at 80 compared to the Sea Guard's 40, both of them with similar shielding there. Leadership 70, same for both. Speed 33, same for both. Melee attack 22, same for both. Melee defense 40, same for both. Weapon strength 28, anti-large, same for both. Charge bonus 4, same for both. Ammunition 22, same for both. Range, the Sentinels take it at 215 compared to the Sea Guard's 164. And missile strength 20, armor piercing, sundering compared to the missile strength of the Lefern Sea Guard, which sits at 19. So as far as when they're in combat, they are identical to the Sea Guard. There's a few less of them. They don't have as much health, but they maybe make up for it in having double the armor of the Sea Guard. So a very good unit to have there. You maybe don't want to have a full front line of the Sentinels though, just due to their slow rate of fire, but again, you might want to do that. Break down the armor of any units they target and then have a bunch of archers behind them peppering whatever comes into range once that armor has been lowered. Could be a very effective combination. So the Sentinels are a lot of fun there. You maybe even want to mix them up with Lefern Sea Guard with their higher rate of fire, being able to demolish stuff as it gets closer. But you'll probably want a few of these in your campaign army. Moving on from the Sentinels, we have the Spire Guard. Now these guys are hybrid missile infantry with spears. So these guys have stockpile, anti-large, charge defense against all, and unbreakable. They also have a load of ammunition, which is their stockpile ability there. So I thought, you know, we compared the last unit to Sea Guard, so why not compare this one to the Sea Guard as well? So we have the Lefern Sea Guard without shields to compare them to the Spire Guard here. The Spire Guard are more expensive here, so it may not be as fair a comparison. But the two of them have not dissimilar health. The Spire Guard sitting a bit higher at 6,400, and that's particularly relevant when you consider they actually have a lot less soldiers in their unit there as well, at 80 compared to the Lefern Sea Guard of 90. The armor is double, no shields for these guys than it is for the Sea Guard. The leadership is 72, a little bit better than the Sea Guard at 70. The Sea Guard with no shields is actually speed 36, so they can get around a bit, whereas these guys have the normal elven speed of 33. Melee attack is 28, so they're a little bit better than the Sea Guard. Melee defense is 32, exactly the same as the Sea Guard. Weapon strength is 30, 2 better than the Sea Guard there, anti-large. The charge bonus is 2, a little bit lower than the Sea Guard with a charge bonus of 4. Ammunition is 45 compared to only 22 for the Sea Guard. And the range is 180, a bit longer than the Sea Guard at 165. And then missile strength is 22 compared to the Sea Guard 19. Now, with their unbreakable and charged defense against all, these guys really are an upgrade from the Lefern Sea Guard without shields. And, you know, might even consider making these guys a second range archers, really with their spears coming in handy if need be. But with all that ammunition, they can fire for days and days and days. So that is the Spire Guard of Tor Yvresse. Next, we have one of the units I was most excited for, the Knights of Tor Gaval, the Griffin Knights of Tor Yvresse, learning to fly their griffins in the mists of this wonderful princedom, truly skilled warriors in the air. Now, when we compare these guys, I thought the only fair comparison was really against the Royal Hippogriff Knights of Bretonnia. So let's have a look at the stats and see how they compare. Knights of Tor Gaval have half the number of the Royal Hippogriff Knights, but they have a huge amount of health at 11,432 compared to the 8,160 of the Royal Hippogriff Knights. They do have a little bit less armor at 80 compared to the Bretonians 90. Leadership is slightly higher at 80 compared to the Bretonian 75. Speed is the same. Melee attack is slightly higher at 50 compared to the melee attack of the Hippogriffs at 46. Melee defense is slightly lower at 32. The Hippogriffs sitting at 34. 300 weapon strength for the Knights of Tor Gaval. That is more than double the weapon strength of the Royal Hippogriff Knights with 135. They're both armor piercing, but that is an impressive weapon strength right there. Charge bonus is 45, a little bit less than the Royal Hippogriff Knights. Both of them cause terror, and the Knights of Tor Gaval are actually missile resistant as well. So that's something to bear in mind. In terms of their cost, the Knights of Tor Gaval do cost 600 more than the Royal Hippogriff Knights in the custom battles there. So, you know, you're expecting them to be a bit better, and that is a devastating weapon strength, and they're a fantastic unit to have around, and I'm very glad they make it, really adding a unique unit into the High Elf roster there. So that's it for the campaign units. Now we're looking at some of the Regiments of Renown quickly. We're not going to compare these against anything, because usually they're units we have already seen on the battlefield with an extra trick or two up their sleeve. And the first of these is the Talons of Tor Kaleda. These are archers from Calador, and they have fire and are resistant to fire and make things flammable, so provide an extra weakness to fire with things they shoot at with their fire, in fact. So that's their little trick up their sleeve compared to other archers. The next unit are Rahagra's Pride, a Regiment of Renown unit of the War Lions of Crace. These guys are fascinating. They are like the War Lions, but they also have the ability to roar, which is an augmentation which affects enemies around them with a -8 leadership and -25 speed. So really get in there, scare them with the fear of the lions charging in, make them run with that -8, and then chase them down as they're slowed down to -25 speed and kill as many as possible. That seems to be the idea with these lions. After the lions, we have the Omen of Asurian, perhaps one of the companion phoenixes to the god Asurian himself in the High Elf pantheon. And this unit is similar to the other Arcane Phoenixes that we're going to be getting, but it does have an added ability, which is the Omen of Hope, which is an aura effect constantly around itself, which grants units near it immunity to psychology, really good for boosting the morale of troops as this creature charges in, and it looks ever so majestic with its lovely coloring there. So that's it, guys. All the units for the High Elves. I hope you got a good look at them, a good idea of their stats and how they might stand on the battlefield. And so without further ado, let's go over to the Greenskins and see what they have to offer. Starting with Grom the Paunch, the gobbo that ate some raw troll flesh and took on some of its properties, taking on a huge stomach, looking wonderful here in the model. Now, he is riding upon a chariot. I don't think there's an option to have him unmounted because he is a large boy and wouldn't get around particularly well if he wasn't on his chariot. He, of course, is armored, anti-infantry, and has regen. He also has a couple of other abilities we're going to get into. That is the Grayton Wazir. That is a 20-second effect, 40 meters around him, plus 16 leadership, plus 30 base weapon damage, 30% that is, and plus 24 melee attack. He also has the Language of the Boys, which is another augment, 30 seconds long, 40 meters as well, plus 5 melee defense, plus 4 leadership, and it gives them immunity to psychology. In terms of his weapons and items, he has the Axe of Grom, which gives him 29 seconds of plus 50% weapon strength and plus 50% armor-piercing weapon damage, as well as a Sundering Armor effect for minus 30 armor. Pretty useful there. And he also has his other item, the Lucky Banner, which is plus 40 at melee attack and plus 40% damage resistance. So really a lot of tools for him to go around being pretty devastating on the battlefield. He also has a 15% missile resistance to help get him around, not make him such a target. Now, when we're looking at people to compare Grom the Paunch to, I really wanted to look at other chariot legendary lords, and so we have Wulfric the Wanderer and Kazarak One-Eye to have a look at, both of whom are mounted on their chariots as we see their stat screen here. So let's take a look at how they compare. Grom is the most expensive at 2,246, with Kazarak at 2,100 and Wulfric just a little bit more expensive than that. They're all armored, they're all anti-infantry. Kazarak doesn't get any forest penalty for his movement, which is a bit of a bonus there. They all have the same armor, Wulfric, of course, having a shield. Leadership, roughly the same. Grom the Paunch has the lowest. He is still a gobbo after all. And he is the quickest, however, with speed 84 compared to the 70 speed of Kazarak One-Eye and the 78 speed of Wulfric the Wanderer. He also has a higher melee attack than Kazarak, but slightly lower than Wulfric at 40. Melee defense is 30, which is the same as Wulfric, a little bit higher than Kazarak One-Eye at 26. Weapon strength, 430 anti-infantry. Kazarak has some armor piercing there, which Grom doesn't have off the bat without his Sundering ability going off. And there is also Wulfric there with 360 anti-infantry and armor piercing. So he has the most damage dealing, but maybe he struggles with some armor without that ability of his. Charge bonus 90, the same as Wulfric, a little bit less than Kazarak One-Eye. We've gone through some of his abilities there. I think with that regen on a chariot, being able to pull out of combat, run away, recharge, come back in, is really useful, actually, with the missile resistance on top and his ability to deal with armor when he needs to against certain units, use all of that 30 seconds, then maybe pull out, regen, attack another unit on the battlefield. Could be a very good unit for people who are particularly good at micro, as are a lot of the chariots in the game. So that's Grom. Moving on to the new hero, which is the Giant River Hag Troll, and she is a spellcaster, a giant troll after all, so she has regen, slimy shanks, and aquatic, so she can move through water fairly easily there. In terms of her abilities, apart from having the Lore of Death, she also has the ability Mither, which is minus 72% charge speed and minus 72% speed, really helping some maybe missiles get down on some enemies or limit the potential of a big charging unit. Also has the Hex, the Overwhelming Odor, with -6 melee attack, and Swamp Breath, a magic missile, powerful explosion, good against armor and versus a single unit. So, you know, she can kind of puke from a distance at things. Really a monstrous unit. In terms of comparisons, I wanted to pick another kind of half-decent melee fighting wizard, and so I wanted to have a look at her compared to the Famir Balefiend, which is also a kind of monstrous creature. In terms of cost, they're not too far away from each other, with the Hag Queen taking it by a bit 100 odd there, and her armor is a little bit lower than the Famir Balefiend's. Her leadership is lower as well. Speed is exactly the same. Melee attack, relatively comparable, but the Famir Balefiend has magic and armor sundering, which gives him the edge there. Melee defense, a little lower as well, with the Balefiend at 35 to the 32 of the Troll Hag. Weapon strength, 360 armor piercing, again, lower than the Balefiend at 400 armor piercing as well, and the charge is pretty much the same, 24 versus 25. So it looks like the main difference here is that she has the Lore of Magic, but also the regenerative ability there as well, with both of them causing fear, both of them siege attackers, and both of them have missile resistance as well. That seems to be the price difference, is that regen ability to be able to run away, come back, and do some damage. But just in terms of sheer fighting ability, you'd maybe go for the Famir Balefiend over the Troll Hag. Now, moving on from the Troll Hag, we have the River Trolls, very closely related, just smaller versions of the Troll Hag without any of her magic. They also have slimy shanks, they're aquatic, they do have poor leadership though, and so I just thought we'd put them up against a unit of normal trolls. They're 100 gold dearer than the normal trolls, same amount in the unit, same amount of health, same amount of armor, same amount of leadership, same amount of speed, not the same amount of melee attack. The normal trolls actually have a better melee attack than the river trolls, and the river trolls have a better melee defense than the normal trolls at 40 compared to their 32. The river trolls have lower weapon strength at 80 armor piercing versus the regular trolls at 100 armor piercing, and their charge bonus is the same. So really that extra 100 is accounting for their odor aspect, which is that -6 melee attack for the enemy, which they have, as well as the River Troll Hag. So that's maybe something to watch out for. But in terms of a straight fight, you're maybe as well off with the normal trolls. The River Trolls really just helping to maybe support another unit in on a fight, lowering the enemy's fighting ability. After the River Trolls, we have the Stone Trolls. These guys are armor piercing, scaly skin, and regeneration. So to compare these, I wanted to put them up against the Chaos Armored Trolls. So their armor is a little bit lower, higher than the regular trolls, but not as high as the Chaos Armored Trolls at 70, compared to the Chaos ones of 110. Leadership is the same, speed again the same, melee attack slightly higher for the Stone Trolls at 36 compared to the Chaos Trolls 34. Melee defense is both the same at 32. Weapon strength is 120 versus the Chaos Trolls 100 armor piercing, both of them. And they have a much higher charge, the Stone Trolls, at 34 compared to 24. So in terms of just pure fighting on their own, it looks like the Stone Trolls might be the better off here. The Chaos Trolls would last maybe a bit longer with their high armor value there, but in terms of damage dealing, it looks like the Stone Trolls are some of the best trolls we currently have in the game. And unlike the Chaos Trolls, they also have missile resistance. Moving away from the trolls, we have the unit in the greenskins that I'm, first equal excited for, which is the Rogue Idol. Now, the Rogue Idol is a huge unit, sort of infused with the spirit of Gork or Mork, and it is just a bunch of rocks or a shrine come to life. And this guy works in a bit of an odd way. He is armor-piercing, anti-infantry, and can cause terror, has a huge amount of armor there, but he also has a couple of abilities. The first of which is the Spirit of Gork or Mork, which is an augment constantly around self. In this case, it's actually a map-wide effect of +4 leadership for the whole army. And he also has this interesting bombardment ability, which is around him when he's fighting. And that basically means that when he's fighting, sort of bits of him are falling off, I think is the idea, and raining down on the enemies below and doing some damage to them. This seems to happen as the Rogue Idol loses health. When the hit points are greater than 75%, he's doing plus 30% armor-piercing weapon damage, but he loses 30 armor. When he's at 50%, he loses another 30 armor and does another 30% armor piercing. And then when he's further down, he's doing even more armor piercing, again losing more armor as a consequence. And he goes into Rampage. So the idea is he becomes much more destructive as his armor goes down and he gets more hurt. So it's kind of an interesting mechanic there for the Rogue Idol, one that's fun to see on the battlefield. So when comparing the Rogue Idol, I wanted to go against another kind of stone structure, pretty expensive as well, and so we went for the Hyro Titan. And this one is slightly different. It can cast a couple of spells, but they're both pretty expensive and can do some decent melee damage. So when comparing the two, obviously the 2,300 of the Rogue Idol versus the 2,000 cost of the Titan, we see that the Rogue Idol has way more health at 16,000 compared to the 12,600 odd of the Titan. Armor 150 compared to the 100 of the Tomb King unit. 75 leadership, so the Rogue Idol wins there. Speed, roughly about the same. Melee attack, 60 versus the 56 magic and fire damage of the Titan. Melee defense, 20, so not that great on defense, but has a lot of health to make up for it and armor, against the Titan's 45. Weapon strength, 600 armor-piercing anti-infantry versus the 550 of the Titan armor-piercing. That's a huge amount of weapon strength, a lot of damage-dealing potential there, and charge bonus is 30 compared to the Titan's 20. So really, in a straight fight, you'd probably take the Rogue Idol, and a lot more potential for damage there with its bombardment ability around itself. If you can really get it in against a group of units, it could be absolutely devastating, the Rogue Idol. So moving on from the Rogue Idol, we have the Snotling Pump Wagons. Now, I just couldn't really think of anything to compare these guys with. They're an expendable chariot unit, really designed just to go in there, do some damage, and get completely decimated themselves. A bit of a kamikaze unit, although they don't explode upon contact with the enemy, although we'll get into some of the intricacies of that with the Regiment of Renowned. But these guys do have little exploding puffs of mushroom that does an area of effect when they're fighting. They can go in and do a blitz and be devastating, as we'll see towards the end of this discussion about the Snotling Pump Wagons. There are 3 varieties of them, and here we just see their stats. Armor 50, speed 60, melee 20, 22, weapon strength 40, and a charge bonus of 50. Very good charge bonus there. The stats aren't particularly fascinating or particularly strong, but, you know, they can get there in there and do a good amount of work. And they're relatively cheap, only $4.50 for the vanilla. There is also, of course, the flapper version, as you can see here, with the boys on top. This gives them a bit of extra speed, taking that up to 70, and everything else is roughly the same, but a much higher charge bonus there as well, with armor piercing and anti-infantry. Now, apart from the flappers, we also have the spiky roller variant, which are unstoppable. They cause fear because of all the spiky rollers, one has to presume. Much higher weapon strength, slightly lower charge bonus than the flapper version, and a slightly higher armor, leadership, and I think slightly higher speed than the normal one. But these guys also do armor sundering, so that is something to watch out for. They can be really useful against armored units. And as you can see here, from a charge of these guys, they can be absolutely devastating to a group of infantry, really getting in there, causing huge damage early on, breaking up the enemy lines. I'm super excited to have these guys in the game. As you see, the variants do get more expensive, with the spiky rollers being 900, which is almost double the price of the vanilla version. But they are a great addition to the game, a fantastic little unit, and really add a lot of flavor to the Greenskin army. So, moving on from the regular units, let's have a look at some of the campaign units. Now, we're not going to spend too much time on these campaign units, because unlike the High Elf units, they're not necessarily different units. They're more like Regiment of Renown units where something has been slightly added to them, or it's a unit that wasn't available to the greenskins before. So that's really what we're looking at here in terms of the new greenskin campaign units. And we're going to start off with the armored squig hoppers. So very much like squig hoppers, look great there with their armored versions. They do poison damage, armor piercing, anti-infantry, and they are a fantastic unit, really good for chasing down missiles and what have you, but not too dissimilar from the squig hoppers we have, just a harder, more hard-hitting version of them there. Moving on from the armored squig hoppers, we have the lava spider rider archers. The idea that these guys come from lava locations. It was hinted in the stream that if you declare a war near a volcano in the campaign, you're likely to get new units, and these are probably the units that you're likely to get involved in that. These lava spider riders, and there's another lava variant of a unit we know coming up. But they do poison and fire, armor piercing, both missile and their hand weapons. So again, another pretty handy unit just to chase stuff down, move pretty rapidly at speed 78. But we've seen the Goblin Spider Riders before. We also have the Spider Hatchlings. We have seen these guys with some of the units in the greenskin ranks so far. They kind of hatch out, but they've been kind of given their own unit here. Really poison, just something to slow down or maybe catch some weaker missile units in your army there. An expendable unit again, pretty rapid at 76, so they will catch most things. So that's kind of how you'd want to use the Spider Hatchlings, but not particularly durable. Only 22 melee attack, 20 weapon defense, 4,380 health. So, you know, they can be a bit fragile, but against the right unit, they can be handy in a pinch. Apart from the Spider Hatchlings, we also have the Super Squig. Very much like the exploding corpses of the Vampire Coast, the same idea applies here. It's a single squig model, you charge it in, he explodes, and that's kind of how he can be of most use there. We also have the addition of Feral Wyverns coming into the greenskin ranks. We've seen Wyverns before as mounts, so basically that's it. Cause terror, can fly around, can be pretty useful. Armor piercing, poison damage as well. So, you know, a handy unit to have in the right circumstances. And there's also the Feral Hydra, fiery breath, as you expect with all Hydras, and the armor-piercing, regen, scaly skin. We've seen Hydras in the game before. The other lava unit here is the Lava Arachnarok Spider, with an ability around itself to bombard. So that's where sort of little streams of fire go in its immediate vicinity and hurt all the units around it. It also has a, I think it was called the Thermal Thorax ability, which is the ability to basically doing consistent damage, not unlike some of the vampire count units have there. So he'll have an aura of effect where he's doing damage around him for periods of time. Also poison, fire damage, anti-large, and armor piercing. So a pretty handy unit, kind of an upgrade on your typical Arachnarok Spider. Moving on from those campaign units, let's have a look at the Regiments of Renown. Again, not spending too much time on these, as they are usually souped up versions of units we've either seen before or have previously discussed. So we're looking at the Regiment of Renown version of the Snotling Pump Wagon, and this thing has a huge exploding area when it charges into combat, laying down a big area of effect that can really decimate units when it charges in. You really want to get it in, pull it out, charge it into something else. The Logie Bogie Spore Sploder is a very cool unit to have on the battlefield, pretty handy there, and is great to look at. So that's how the Logie Bogie Spore Sploder works in terms of the Snotling Pump Wagons. There's also the Swamp Things, the River Troll unit. Now, what makes these different from the regular River Trolls is they cause terror and also have that poisoning effect as well. So that's how they kind of distinguish themselves from the regular River Troll. The last but by no means least unit of the Regiment of Renown is the Big Un, a fantastic looking black-rocked rogue idol who has the ability for a missile attack. A devastating missile attack at 414 damage, armor piercing. It kind of tears chunks off itself and can lob them at the enemy. Now, he also has an ability to refill his ammo, which isn't huge. You can see his ammunition at 10 there. But when he refills his ammo, he does damage to himself. It's not a significant amount of damage, but he does damage to himself. The idea that he's ripping a chunk off himself to then hurl at the enemy. So he can do that for a while. A fantastic, almost additional artillery piece in your battlefield. And when it comes down to it, he's also a rogue idol, so will love to get in there and do huge amounts of damage against any melee attackers as well. Fantastic unit to have on your side. That high armor means you can probably stand out front, absorb a lot of damage from enemy missiles as well. A great unit to have as a Regiment of Renown, and one of the funner ones in the Orc army. So that is about it for these units, ladies and gentlemen. Do leave me your thoughts down below in terms of what you think of each unit, which ones you're particularly looking forward to, or anything like that. If you're interested in any of the lore of any of the units I've talked about today, do check the breakdown of the DLC, but in particular if you're interested in Legendary Lords, do check the lore videos popping up right now. But as always, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright guys, bye.